Good morning, boys and girls. I want to tell you a story that happened over 3,000 years ago. It's about a mean Egyptian king who took all the Jewish people and turned them into his slaves. Slaves have to work for free. They have a terrible life. And it wasn't good for the slaves there in Egypt. It was hot, always sunny. They had to do heavy work, carrying heavy bricks, building things without enough food. They were whipped if they didn't work fast enough. It was an awful life. And God wanted to free his people. And he was going to use someone that you've probably heard the story about before. Remember the story of Moses when he was a little baby and the king was killing all the baby boys? And Moses' mother had to hide him away. And then when he was old enough, still a tiny baby, she made a special basket that would float in the river, and his sister watched. She had to get him away from her home because he would be killed. And as his sister watched, she saw the Pharaoh's daughter, the mean king's daughter, found the baby and took him back to the palace. And she became his mother. She adopted him. But she was a good woman, and she took care of Moses, and he became a prince. But when he was old enough, he found out that he was not actually an Egyptian. He was from the Israelite people. God told Moses that he was going to free his people, and he wanted him to go to that mean king and to tell him to let his people go. So Moses did, and Pharaoh pretty much laughed at him. The mean king was called Pharaoh. He said, I'm not going to let the people go. Go away. Tell your God that those people are my people. They're my slaves. Well, when the king said no, God sent plagues. A plague is something really bad. And the first plague, God turned the water in the big river Nile, where the people got all their water in Egypt. He turned the water into blood. Can you imagine? You go out to get your water, and it's blood. That was the first plague that God sent. But you know what? It lasted a whole week. And even when it was over and the water went back to normal, that old mean Pharaoh said, no, I'm not going to let your people go. You tell your God, Moses. You tell him no. Then he sent frogs. Well, frogs aren't so bad unless there are millions of frogs all over the ground, in the street, and everywhere you walk, and in your bed, and in your oven, and in your house, and everywhere, maybe even on your shoulders, frogs everywhere. It was terrible. When God finally took away the frogs, the Pharaoh said, nope, they can't go. Then he sent a stream of gnats and lice. They're little tiny bugs that buzz in your face and bite you all over. And the Egyptians were miserable. They had bugs all over them, and you couldn't do anything about it. There were millions and zillions of them. And Pharaoh said, just take these away, and I'll let the people go. And God took all the bugs away, just like that. But then Pharaoh changed his mind, and he said, no, I'm not going to let them go. And so he did this over and over. God sent plague after plague after plague. Swarming flies. He killed all the Egyptians' horses and cows and sheep. He sent a plague that made boils and sores all over their bodies. He sent a plague of hail, ice balls that fell from the sky that were huge, that would kill people when it hit them. He sent locusts that there were so many in the sky it blocked out the sun. He sent a plague of darkness. It was so dark for 3 days, they couldn't see their hand in front of their face. And still the Pharaoh said, no, you tell your God, these people are my people, and I'm never going to let them go. So Moses went back to Pharaoh, and he said, this is what God says. I'm going to send the worst plague ever. And the firstborn in every family in Egypt will die. Well, Pharaoh didn't believe it. He pretty much said, I don't care. I'm not going to let the people go. Moses went back to the Israelite people, the slaves, and said, get ready. God is going to send the worst plague of all. And you have to be ready, but we've got to follow his directions. God told Moses to tell the people when they killed the fatted lamb, that was a lamb that they ate for supper before their trip to leave, that they were to take the blood and smear it on the doorway. And if they did that, then death would pass over the house. No one, the firstborn, would not die in their house. That's where the word Passover came from. And so the Israelites did that. They put the blood on their door, and they ate their supper quickly, and then they waited because they knew they were going to be leaving soon. They had faith that God would free them. And that night at midnight, the death came all over the country of Egypt, and the firstborn in every family died, except for the Israelites. And the Israelites were just fine. No one died because they had followed God's directions. And when Pharaoh found his firstborn son dead, he called for Moses and said, "Get out, take your people and go. They don't want to ever see you again." And Moses went back and got the people, and they left Egypt. They took all their things that they had, and they left to find their promised land. It took many years, but in many, many years later, they found the promised land, and they were as free as they could be. They never had to be slaves again. You know, when Jesus was born, he set us free. We're free from sin because all we have to do is ask for forgiveness. And because Jesus died for us, he set us free. Let's say our prayer. Dear God, we know some things we do are not pleasing to you. Thank you for Jesus, who sets us free from our sin. Amen. Have a good week.